Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, a show about the history and folklore of the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. What were you doing when you were 16? Perhaps you're not 16 yet. In 1804, 16-year-old Jesse Torrey had a big idea. Jesse Torrey was born Jesse Torrey Jr. in 1787. He was the son of Jesse Torrey and his wife, Jerusha Davidson, who came from Lebanon, Connecticut, to live in New Lebanon, New York, just over the Berkshire County, Massachusetts border. Jesse's father fought in the Revolutionary War and died young, at about the age of only 33, and when Jesse Jr. was only 7 years old. This left his wife Jerusha and Jesse Jr.'s siblings alone, and it may have been helping his mother out so much, for lack of his father, that grew Jesse's confidence, so that when he finally had the big plan he felt as though he could go out and really do it. A friend of the family, one Dr. Younglove, had a large collection of books, and thus young Jesse was able to extend his knowledge by borrowing these books. It dawned on him, however, as he watched his schoolmates learn to read in class and then slowly forget the skill, that a lack of access to reading materials doomed many to a life of illiteracy, despite at one time being taught. So Jesse hatched a plan. He spent an entire winter walking through the snowy countryside, gathering donated books from other residents of New Lebanon. By March 12th of 1804, when Jesse was 16, he wrote the constitution of a new association, what he called New Lebanon Juvenile Society for the Acquisition of Knowledge. 147 other kids from town signed it, and with that, the very first free lending library in the United States opened. Jesse ran it from the family home on West Street, and only had about 100 books to begin with. The library, however, was a great success, and became a model for other such ventures across the country. But that's not where Jesse's story ends, or this would be a very short episode. Dr. Younglove inspired in Jesse a desire to learn medicine. He obtained his degree and opened a medical office with Dr. Amasa Ford in the Berkshire city of Pittsfield. But he couldn't settle his mind on just his medical work. He continued working to help open and promote libraries. He traveled up and down the East Coast, talking to influential people of the era, and even suggested a tax on alcohol that may be used to fund libraries. Somewhere during this period, he met and married Azaba West. Together, it appears that they had 3 children, maybe only 2. There's a Nathaniel Torrey listed, who may not have made it out of infancy, a John Torrey, and a Herman Torrey. Jesse supplemented his income by writing children's books, thus creating himself more reading opportunities for the young, as well as writing articles for newspapers about his ideas on the importance of reading and an early education. He even met with President Madison. On one such journey along the coast, again raising awareness for the need of libraries, he came across a ghastly sight. 2 men from Georgia led between them a string of men, women, and children, all chained together. They were slaves. Some were newly purchased. Some had recently been recaptured after running away, and some, he'd later find out, were free people who were being kidnapped and sent further south to be forced into servitude. It's not that Jesse didn't know about slavery. Of course he did. Every American knew it existed. But at that time in New England and New York, one just didn't see such things. It wasn't as obvious as it was in the South. Jesse had run headlong into the reality of it and couldn't stay silent ever again. So with just as much zeal as he'd been putting into his promotion of literacy, he began to research and campaign against slavery. He had another visit to the president lined up to again discuss libraries. But knowing that the First Lady supported the institution of slavery, Jesse turned the visit into a rather heated discourse on the ills of such a stance. His thank you letter to them afterward is more of an apology letter for his rudeness. Their letter in response claims that they took no notice. In 1817, he published Portraiture of Slavery. He accumulated the knowledge he needed to write this work by going to the homes of black residents of Washington, D.C., and interviewing them. He heard horrific stories of free or freed black people being kidnapped at any hour, whether while walking to work or sound asleep in their own beds. Children were taken just as readily as adults. Thus, every black lived in constant fear of capture and felt they couldn't trust a single white man whom they passed on the street. Anyone may in an instant turn and snatch them away. Wives would be left wondering why their husbands never returned, or children left parentless and alone. In an attempt to instill better values in young Americans, he then wrote The Moral Instruction and Guide to Virtue and Happiness. It sold very well. He continued to write educational books throughout. In 1822, his work, American Slave Trade, came out. His books on slavery contain many wonderful engravings depicting the startling and harrowing moments taken from the stories of African American residents as they avoided kidnappings, or recalled the stories of loved ones being stolen away. These engraved illustrations are the work of an artist, Alexander Ryder. Jesse kept up his friendship with President Madison, even sending him some of his own writings on slavery. What the Madisons thought about this is not known. They did, in fact, own slaves themselves. Perhaps Jesse thought that to change their minds would be to change the minds of a nation. Quite a few of his works can be found at archive.org, simply by searching for his name. This website contains not only his books on education, slavery, but also books meant for children. But Madison didn't stay president forever, and things changed, as they always do. But Jesse Torrey kept working, and kept writing, to promote both libraries, the education of children, and to raise awareness of the ills brought about by the slave trade, and the terrible practice of kidnapping free people to sell as slaves. At some point he moved out to Montezuma, New York, where he passed away at just 59 on the 29th of September, 1846. Record-keeping as to the date of his death varies widely. I've seen his death date set at 23 years earlier, but 1846 is the date that his gravestone reads. He was buried in Montezuma, New York, at the Montezuma Rural Cemetery. He didn't live long enough to witness the war that would bring an end to that which he abhorred. But his other idea lives on in almost every town in the nation. Large and small, free libraries offer everyone a chance to learn without restraint, and his words live on as a sort of memorial to a moment in time that ensnared so many, and a movement to free them. He wrote in the introduction to Portraiture of Domestic Slavery, to the candid consideration of philanthropists, legislators, and possessors of slaves, the following essay is respectfully submitted by the author, without offering any apology for pleading the case of an injured and despised race of men, except the consciousness of being himself a man. This has been The Berkshires Gone By, created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Renier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where I post a new picture pertaining to Berkshire history almost every day. You can also find other episodes on Facebook, YouTube, and by going to www.theberkshiresgoneby.com, where you can find every episode we've ever made and specific pictures pertaining to each episode. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening.